Hi again. So last lesson we left off here. We'd created the settings to calculate indirect illumination and have correct detail, but we're missing all of the material elements. We're missing the environment and we're missing the sun information. So it's still pretty rough. What this video is going to be about is creating the materials needed for this architectural render. So the materials are located here in this toolbar under the M. There's nothing here at the moment. And what we're going to do is we're going to create 5 basic materials that are quite useful to know for architectural purposes. We're going to create concrete. We're going to create glass. We're going to create metal for the aluminum frames in the windows. And we're going to create a screen using the same material for the metal, but perforated. And we're going to create a grass. That's 5 materials, and then we're going to assign them to the layers here. So here we are. There's nothing at the moment for materials. In order to start creating materials, we're going to start with standard materials. So you go to Scene Materials, right-click, Create Material, and just go to Standard. Okay, that'll create a default material. You want to create 5 standard materials. And just rename them. So that's going to be concrete, glass, metal, metal screen, and grass. So let's start with concrete. So when we're going to create a concrete material, the most work that we're going to have to do is put in the correct maps. That means the correct image files that are going to give this material its texture. There aren't really very many complex reflections, refractions, or anything in this material, and it's mostly to do with the quality of our images. Now, when you want to assign images, you're first going to have to download them. And you can do this through just a Google search, or you can go to sites like vismats.com or textures.com, and they have really good libraries. And when you download them, you can download either just the image files, or you can download the materials that are already linked up to the image files. But we're going to be creating them from scratch here, so you can see. So now we've already saved some good image files to our hard drive in a folder called Assets. And so when you want to create a basic material with a texture, you just go to the diffuse layer, which is at the top of a standard material. And under color, you're going to see this gray. And actually, if you click preview, it'll show what the material's looking like at any moment. So at the moment it's matching this gray, but instead of this color, we can assign a map. So if you click on this M right here, and then under here it says none, you go to texture bitmap, then it's going to ask you to point it to a file. So I have saved all of my assets here. So my concrete is split up into different images, and that's quite important to understand. One of them is the color information and what it looks like. Another one is a bump map, which is going to it's going to determine how rough it looks in direct light. So those are the two that we're going to use. So we're going to set the color map to the diffuse layer. So there it is. If you just click preview, it'll show up there. Now, these are all parameters that will change how this looks, but if you got a good image and it was more or less what you wanted it to look like, then you don't have to change anything and just click OK and just update here. And it's now showing your concrete texture. Now, the one other thing that we're going to do here is add a bump map. That's at the bottom of every standard material. Under Maps, you click Bump, OK. And then again, click to add a map. And then click Bitmap. And then just point it to our bump material. Don't change anything, there's no need to. And then it's quite subtle here, the change, but it should be more evident close up that we've added a subtle texture. Now the bump is at its maximum strength. We want to change it to 0.3. And that should give us a nice material. And again, those are the two very, very basic things that you need to do to assign a color to material, a texture, and the bump map, which is how rough it looks. So next up is the glass. Once again, we're starting with a basic gray. So the most important thing that we're going to do with our glass material, let me just get rid of this window here, is we're going to add a layer other than the diffuse layer, because glass also needs to reflect. So when we right click here, it asks us if we want to create a layer. And there are several options. Emissive, in case you wanted to emit light. Reflection, if you wanted to reflect. Diffuse, that's the standard color information. And finally, at the end, is refraction, in case you wanted to have a more complex kind of glass or transparent qualities. But since this is an architectural render and we want really quick, just transparent and reflective glass, we're just going to create a reflection layer. So now we've got a reflection and a diffuse. Now first, what we're going to set up is we'll ignore the reflection for now and just concentrate on the diffuse. We're going to want to leave this very dark because we don't want the color of the material itself to be too prominent. And we're going to increase the transparency. So whenever it shows a color for a parameter like transparency, that means it's asking for a value between 0 black or 1 white. So in this case, white is the most transparent. Now, if I make this absolutely transparent and I preview it, then it's only going to show the reflection layer, which you're looking at here. But I actually do want it to be just a little opaque and a bit more prominent. So it's always good to set it at a sort of off-white. And again, make the color just a dark gray. And that's just going to give the glass a bit more presence than just the reflection layer. Now, under reflection, we can set the amount of reflection. Now, if by default, this is set to a map. So you can see that I tried to change the color so I could change the values and nothing happened. Why? Because every time that a map is set, it's going to override this. So there is a map set here, and it's a Fresnel texture. Before we get into that, let's just see what happens when we select none, and we do this. Go to go to completely black. And then what we've done now is we've removed all of the reflection. And all there is a very, very light kind of haze. I've probably not even visible at your the resolution that you're looking at it. The diffuse layer, it's almost transparent. And if I set it to 100% reflection, then that's a perfect mirror. However, the reason that a map was set is because real materials don't reflect the same at all angles. In reality, the surfaces that are facing away from or at an angle to the viewer are going to reflect more than the surfaces that are almost perpendicular to the viewer, like at the center of the sphere. And so to account for this, you have a Fresnel function. So it's a mathematical function that's going to account for that and make it much more realistic. And whenever you add a reflection, it's going to be automatically set to Fresnel. And so usually these settings are going to be pretty much okay for glass. So you won't want to change any of this. And that's going to give you good glass. So we really didn't have to change anything, but just so you guys could see how you can make either a perfect mirror or realistic glass, and how you can control this a bit more, because this is quite useful to when you want to get creative with your renders. So that's why we went through this. But in general, all that you have to do is set a very dark color for the diffuse, set a very high transparency for the diffuse, but not total transparency, and set the basic Fresnel texture for the reflection map. And that's good. So next up is metal. Now, metal also has a combination of diffuse and reflection. So we're going to add, again, a reflection layer and a diffuse layer. So first up is the diffuse layer. Now we're not going to have any transparency this time, and we're going to have a gray, but we're going to want to make it slightly cooler. So make it slightly inching towards blue. So just slightly cooler is good. Maybe not that cool. All right. And now reflections are going to work a bit differently. So once again, we're going to be looking at the map, but we're going to change something. We're going to want reflections to happen at the perpendicular level as well. The white here means at the perpendicular, it's not going to have any reflection. And we actually want to set this to a gray value. And the IOR, which is the type of just basically how the balance between reflections and both sides are working, is going to be a bit different. We're going to want to set this to 20, and you're going to see the final effect. So still Fresnel, like the glass, but we changed the parameters a bit. Oh, so I tried to update this, but because the update only shows the layer I've clicked, then I can't see any of the reflection layer. When I click metal, so the parent layer, the actual material, and I click preview, then it shows all of the layers. So now that's showing reflection happening all over, which is kind of what we want. But there's one more thing that we want to add, which is the glossiness. Now we have a glossiness table here that determines how sharp the reflections are. Now here it looks like a super polished metal, but we don't really want that in this case. We want a super smooth MacBook type aluminium. So what we want to do is take this, and from 1, we're going to change it to 0.85 in both cases. and change the subdivisions, which is going to be the quality of the material, the quality of the glossiness effect, and we're going to up it a bit to 16. And now we're getting this really nice effect. Now, it just depends on how reflective you want it, but you could even make this 0.5. And it gets even smoother. So it just depends on how polished you want your metal. So let's leave it at 0.65. And so that's how we've made a nice metal. Now for our next trick, we wanted to set a metal screen, which is basically this material, but perforated with lots of little holes to make it into a screen. Now, instead of starting from scratch here, I'm actually going to delete this. Remove material. And I'm going to take this metal and I'm going to duplicate it. And now this is going to be metal screen. So how do I introduce perforations into this material? I'm going to do that by adding a transparency map, which is going to control which parts of this material are completely see-through and which parts are completely opaque. Now, a transparency map should look like, once again, I click on the map, click on bitmap, and I go to my assets. And I've got a perforated metal material right here, which, if I can show you guys what it looks like up close, it would be nicer. So that's a bit like what it looks like up close. It's just very small perforations. Because here it just looks a bit fuzzy. Now when I add that, and I click update, it's a bit fine to look at here, but now you can see that it's starting to become a bit see-through. But with the mesh kind of perforated screen quality to it. So now if we were to look at this very much up close, then we'd see that it has the perforations in it. So, and these could be in any pattern that you find online, or you could even make your own. Now, finally, we've got grass. This is again going to be a case of just adding a color, just a color map, like concrete. So we go bitmap, look at our assets, and we've got, again, a color and a bump for the grass. So there it is. Click on bump. And set that. Now, when it comes to a material like grass, which actually has a very complex texture to it, we have the option of creating either a bump, which works well for very fine detail, but detail that's very shallow, or we can create a displacement, which actually affects the geometry of the surface and makes texture detail much more vivid. Now we're going to explain that difference in another video. But just so you guys know that there is that option. And here, since the grass isn't going to be looked at too closely, we're just going to add a bump, and we're going to just bump that up to 1. So now we've got our materials. Now what we're going to do is assign them to each layer. So we've got all of our layers here, aluminium. And what happens here is that right at the right of each of these layer names is this circle that contains the material under the materials column. So if you just click this, you're going to get something like this. Let me resize this. And at the moment, it's just a basic material. That's why everything looks white at the moment. It's just got the default white. But up here, it's asking you if you want to assign a material by plugin, which is what we want to do. Once we click that, it asks us to browse for it. And then materials, we can go, and it's got all of the names that we got down. So it's metal. So now we've assigned metal. And now it changes here, and you can read what material it's got. So now the panels, which are the screens, are going to be the metal screen material. Columns are going to be concrete. The two glazing materials are going to be the glass material. So we selected them both, and I just have to click on one. Browse to glass. And both of them are updated. The floor, oops, let's just make that into concrete. Building hasn't been painted yet. Walls. Concrete as well. And also, oh, I haven't included a layer here for grass. Let me just make a new sublayer. And I'm going to add this surface here in the front, which is just going to be landscaping, and add that to this layer. Make that grass, sorry. Now, when I click on the rendered view, it's updated it to the best of its abilities with a preview. So we can see that the materials have been added. Sometimes it's not able to give you a correct preview, but most of them sometimes do. And you'll notice quickly that it's assigned basically whatever size it wants to your perforations on your screens. It's assigned an arbitrary size for the grass. And so we actually want to modify how these materials are mapped onto the objects. And that's going to be the next video, because that's really, really quite important to have a precise representation. So let's just go back to our view. And we're going to create just a render of where we are. All right, so now the materials are in there. And actually, we've shortened the video for you guys, but this actually took a ridiculously long time to render. So what we should be doing, I'm just going to go to the options again, and before the render is final, under light catch, you want to change the subdivisions from 2000 to 800, because otherwise you're going to be sitting here for ages like I have. Now, what you see here is still missing proper reflections. The glazing looks black because obviously it's reflecting a black sky. It looks a bit better down here when it's reflecting things around it, but we still have to add all of the proper lighting and just get all of the materials placed correctly and to their correct size. So those are going to be the next videos.